I've been wounded in combat before, scratches, burns, shrapnel cuts, even a fractured rib once. But nothing compared to the day I genuinely believed my life was over. It happened in a remote village on the outskirts of Fallujah, a place that had once been quiet, peaceful even, before the war tore through it like a wildfire. We'd been tasked with clearing a series of crumbling alleyways after intelligence reported a hidden cell operating from inside the village ruins. It was supposed to be a quick movement, in sweep out. But combat doesn't respect plans. We entered through the west side, moving in a staggered formation along a narrow, broken street where half the buildings leaned inward like tired old men. My team moved silently except for the crunch of debris under our boots. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and something older. Something burned into the ground long before we arrived. Then everything erupted. The first burst of gunfire tore through the window of a collapsed home to our left. I remember the sound more than the flash, the metallic snap that echoes differently at close range. Before I could shout a warning, rounds were ricocheting off stone, sending shards of rock into the air like tiny daggers. We scrambled for cover, firing back toward the shadows where the muzzle flashes flickered. I took position behind a cracked wall, leaning out just enough to lay down suppressive fire. That's when the second burst hit us, this time from behind. We'd walked into a kill box. We tried to reposition, tried to break contact, tried anything to regain control. The alleyway turned into chaos, shouting, gunfire, dust clouds rising like ghosts from the ground. I moved to shift my position when something slammed into me. Not a push, not a punch, a hot, crushing force that tore through my side and spun me backward. I hit the ground hard, my rifle skidding out of reach. Pain exploded in my ribs like someone had set a fire inside my body. I tried to breathe, but each breath came in sharp stabs. When I looked down, all I saw was blood spreading across my uniform. Not a small patch, an expanding one. My vision swayed. The world tilted. I tried to call out to my men, but my voice came out as nothing but a weak rasp. Gunfire echoed around me, but it felt like I was underwater, muffled, distant, unreal. The alley dust began to settle enough for me to see figures moving, blurry silhouettes in the haze. My hand reached for my sidearm, but my fingers barely twitched. I was slipping. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. Then I saw a shadow approaching. Tall, lean, rifle slung across the chest. Definitely not one of ours. The silhouette paused, then stepped closer. Right then, I accepted death. Not dramatically, not heroically, just quietly. It was strange how calm I felt. Like all the fear drained out of me along with the blood leaking from my side. I remember thinking about my parents, about unfinished things, about how I wouldn't even get the chance to send a final message. The figure knelt beside me. He was close enough now that I could see the outline of his face. A beard, dark eyes, enemy uniform. I waited for the shot. Instead, he lowered his weapon and reached toward me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dying the way I expected. Not by an enemy's bullet, anyway. When he knelt beside me, I thought he was checking if I was still alive before finishing the job. That's what made the next few seconds so surreal. He lowered his rifle slowly, like he wanted me to understand he wasn't there to hurt me. His eyes shifted around the alley, watching for any sign of my team or his. Then he looked at me again, really looked. There was something in his face I didn't recognize at first. Not hostility, not triumph, something closer to concern. He pressed 2 fingers against my neck, checking my pulse. I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry all I managed was a weak groan. He nodded as if confirming what he already knew. I was fading fast. With quiet urgency, he pulled a small field bandage from his vest. I stared at him, confused, angry, helpless. Why was he doing this? What did he gain from saving the life of someone sent to kill him? He tore open the bandage with his teeth and pressed it firmly against the wound in my side. Pain shot through me so sharply that I nearly blacked out again. He held it there, applying pressure with both hands while his eyes flicked to the rooftops and corners of the alley. We both knew we were in a crossfire zone. Rounds cracked above us, hitting walls and spraying dust over our heads. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me with resentment. Just focus. Determination. Humanity. He muttered something under his breath. Arabic, I think. A prayer or a curse. Maybe both. I tried to speak, to ask him why. All I could say was, Why are you doing this? He looked down at me, eyes steady. In accented English, he said one word. Human. He tightened the dressing again, then reached into a small utility pouch and pulled out a makeshift tourniquet. He slid it under my arm and tightened it around my torso. Not perfect, but enough to slow the bleeding. Enough to buy me time. Then he did something that still haunts me to this day. He put down his rifle. Completely. Left it on the ground beside him. Anyone could have rushed into that alley and shot us both. He didn't care. He wasn't a soldier in that moment. He wasn't an enemy. He was just a man saving another man's life. He took my dog tags into his hand and read my name. Mark, he whispered, as if committing it to memory. My vision blurred again. My tongue felt thick. My breaths were shallow and ragged. He lifted my head slightly, helping me breathe easier. I remember seeing his hands. They were dirty, calloused, trembling slightly from the adrenaline, just like mine had trembled on my first deployment. Those hands weren't the hands of a monster. They were the hands of someone who'd lived through too many battles, too many losses, too many decisions like the one he was making right then. Gunfire erupted again somewhere behind him. He looked back over his shoulder, tense. He knew he had only seconds before his own men or mine descended on us. He tapped my shoulder lightly and said, "Stay," as if I had a choice. Then he stood, grabbed his rifle, and disappeared into the maze of ruins as fast as he had appeared. My vision dimmed, darkness creeping in from the edges. The last thing I felt before blacking out was the warmth of the bandage he had pressed into my side. Not the warmth of blood. The warmth of mercy. When I came to, the world was still spinning. My ears rang, and everything looked like it was covered in fog. Voices echoed somewhere down the alley. English voices. My team. I tried to call out, but my throat produced nothing but a dry croak. Boots pounded the ground. Shadows moved above me. Sergeant Reddington. He's here. I heard someone shout. Hands lifted me gently, rolling me onto a stretcher. More voices, louder now, panicked but relieved. Someone pressed a fresh dressing on my wound. Someone else checked my pulse. I felt a needle in my arm, cold fluid flowing into my veins. Easy, Sarge, we got you. As they carried me toward the extraction point, pieces of memory flashed like broken film. The enemy soldier's face. His hands on the bandage. His single word. Human. I wanted to tell my men. Wanted to say, someone saved me. But the words wouldn't come. They got me to the medevac bird, the rotors thundering overhead, kicking dust into the air in swirling clouds. I felt myself being loaded into the helicopter. The medic shouted something I couldn't hear. The vibrations made my teeth chatter. Before the doors closed, I turned my head just enough to see the village shrinking behind us. And for a split second, just a fraction of a heartbeat, I saw him. Standing atop a broken wall, rifle slung over his shoulder, watching the helicopter lift off. Not aiming at us. Not running. Just watching. Our eyes locked from a distance, so far that I shouldn't have been able to recognize him. But I did. I knew it was him. The man who had saved my life. Then the helicopter banked, and he was gone. I spent weeks recovering in a field hospital before being transferred to a larger base. Doctors told me I was lucky. Very lucky. The bullet had torn through muscle and grazed my ribs, but missed anything vital by centimeters. My men visited whenever they could. They told me how they found me. How they followed a faint trail of disturbed dust and footprints. How they found a bloody bandage they didn't recognize. How they couldn't understand why the enemy didn't finish me. I didn't tell them. Not then. Because the story didn't fit neatly into the black and white picture of war. Because I didn't want them to question their instincts. Because I didn't want anyone to hesitate when their own life was at stake. But mostly because I didn't know how to explain what happened without sounding like I'd hallucinated the whole thing. As my body healed, my mind kept returning to that moment. The moment he knelt beside me with concern instead of hatred. The moment he put down his weapon. The moment he chose compassion in a place where compassion had no business existing. War trains you to see the enemy as a threat, a target, a danger. But that day, he was none of those things. He was a man who saved another man. Nothing more, nothing less. And the weight of that truth was something I wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Years passed. I finished my deployments. I retired with the rank of sergeant. I built a quiet life, far from the deserts where I left pieces of myself. But no matter where I went, no matter how many years piled on between then and now, I never forgot the man who saved me. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet enough for thoughts to grow loud, I find myself replaying that moment in the alley. The dust, the blood, the gunfire, his face, his voice, his hands pressing the bandage against my wound, his single word echoing in my mind. Human. I've tried to understand why he did what he did. Was it a moral impulse? A moment of clarity? A refusal to let the war swallow the last piece of his humanity? Or was it something simpler, a soldier looking at another soldier and seeing himself? During my recovery, I learned more about the enemy fighters in that region. Many weren't extremists. Many weren't ideologists. Some were simply locals forced into fighting or young men with nowhere else to go. Some were defending their homes. Others were fighting for a cause they barely understood. Some were scared kids caught in something bigger than all of us. Maybe he was one of them. Maybe he wasn't. I'll never know. But here's what I do know. That moment changed me. It changed the way I viewed war. It changed the way I viewed the enemy. It changed the way I viewed myself. Because if compassion can exist in the middle of a gunfight, if mercy can appear between two men trained to kill each other, then maybe the world isn't as broken as it seems. One day, long after I left the military, I joined a veteran support group. We shared stories, losses, victories, guilt, healing. One night, someone asked if any of us had ever been saved by somebody we least expected. Most guys talked about their teammates, medics, commanders, friends. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said the words I'd been carrying silently for years. An enemy soldier saved my life. The room went silent. Not judgmental. Not disbelieving. Just silent. Then a Marine across from me nodded slowly and said, "Happens more than people think." That was the first time I realized I wasn't alone. That humanity survives even in the darkest places. That compassion doesn't belong to a uniform. It belongs to people. I don't know if he survived the war. I don't know his name. I don't know if he remembers me, or if saving me was just a moment of instinct he forgot days later. But every year on the date of that ambush, I sit outside in the quiet and whisper a thank you to the night sky. Not because he spared my life, but because he reminded me of something I had forgotten in the chaos of combat. Even in war, we are still human. Even in battle, mercy can exist. And sometimes, the person you're taught to fear is the one who shows you the most kindness. I owe my life to a man I was trained to kill. A man who chose compassion over violence. A man who walked into the alley that day and made a decision that shaped the rest of my life. I never learned his name, but I remember his face. I remember his hands. And I remember the truth he left me with. We are enemies only because someone told us to be. But we are human because we choose to be. And that day, he chose to be human.